Ian Johnson is an architect turned sculptor. He's based these days in Nelson, although he travels the world a lot doing various residencies. Since the mid-1990s, he's been pursuing an interest in ceramic and more recently large-scale installations. And I've talked with Ian before, and I really love talking about how for him he starts with one idea and it leads down so many different avenues and sometimes gets bigger and bigger, which is what happened with the scale of this installation. His latest show opened last night in Caslow to cheers, oohs and ahs, apparently, from what I've heard from those who were there. It's called The Chamber, Reinventing Consumption. And if you look at the langham.ca website, you'll just see one of the pictures there of what look like a number of chairs encased in plastic that's kind of sucking right onto them. And that is part of the process with this latest installation. And when Ian Johnson was in Vancouver recently for a show that was opening, a different show that was opening in Surrey, I had a chance to talk to him about how he created this recent body of work and his idea, the idea behind what's going on in this installation. Great to see you again, Ian.
It's nice to be back, thanks.
Tell me about this huge project.
It started probably in the 90s when I was introduced to a woodworker who uses vacuum forming for making curved sheets of plywood.
And what's vacuum forming?
In his case, he used a plastic bag in which he would suck the air out of, and it worked as a clamp, and it clamped the thin veneers or plies of wood together. In my case, it's a garbage bag and a vacuum cleaner.
And you do what with these things?
Basically, I take a slab of wet clay and I drape it over whatever object I feel like forming and put it in a bag and turn on the vacuum cleaner and it sucks the air out. And it's almost like looking at some kind of vacuum-packed product.
So what have you been doing then with the vacuum forming?
Well, it started a couple of years ago in a residency in Holland, and I vacuum formed just about anything that I could get my hands on. And it started with...
If it sat still for a while, it got vacuum formed.
And being Holland, there had to be some bicycles involved, but there were electric typewriters, there were frying pans and cappuccino makers and telephones, and I actually became seduced by this one particular old desktop-style telephone from the 50s or the 40s.
And so you would put the clay over it, you'd put it in a bag, suck the air out, and then the clay would be completely encasing the object.
Yeah, encasing the top. If it completely encased it, I wouldn't be able to get it out.
Well, true.
Again.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's very good for making tile-like objects.
And so where did you go from there then, working on this whole idea of reinventing consumption? And what do you mean by that anyway, reinventing consumption?
There's a pendulum swing in my practice where I tend to run headlong into looking at waste and refuse, and then I run in the other direction as fast and as far as I can go. This project sort of embraced the idea of invention as a way of escaping all of the refuse and the actual garbage. So this was basically just trying to look at it from a completely different perspective.
And so what is the perspective on this one then, Ian?
Like most of my work, it follows a kind of a journey. And so it begins with this invention that until someone tells me otherwise, and probably there is someone out there who has worked with vacuum forming clay on top of objects, but until they tell me otherwise, I'm the inventor of that. In looking at inventions, I started looking and seeing that a lot of the most interesting and most important inventions were accidental, like the Post-it note and insulin and Coca-Cola and X-rays, and it goes on and on and on and on. Looking at my invention of the vacuum forming using clay and knowing that it isn't the most earth-shattering invention, I thought, well, maybe this invention is really that other thing. And I'll be looking at this invention of vacuum forming, but I'll discover this much more important thing. As I went along in the process of exploring this vacuum forming technique, I decided that this thing that I would discover wasn't necessarily a thing or an invention, but it really could just be a new direction for my work. And that's what it ended up becoming.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What did you do next then?
I did do a lot of experiments with vacuum forming in Holland, and then I had another residency in Red Deer where I continued that work, and then that followed with the residency in Georgia. The discovery that I made after looking back at my documentation was that I was really quite fascinated with the bag itself and how it would alternately reveal and conceal its contents. And started imagining this bag at a much larger scale, the scale of my living room. And then I thought, well, why stop there? And why not make it even larger? And then how does this bag inflate and deflate and what's inside this bag? And so that's actually become the piece of work that I'm going to show in Caslow called The Chamber. It is a very large bag. It ranges in length from 20 to 30 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 12 feet high.
And it really is a bag?
And it really is a bag. It's made out of ripstop nylon. And when it inflates, the lights in the room go down and it's very dim. And then there's the sound of flowing water, which I recorded a couple of different places. Both of them, for me, like they represent idyllic places. It's kind of like, I wouldn't call it a state of denial, but I think that's a good way to describe it. It's a state of kind of like bliss. There's serenity. It's the space is all white, but it's dim. Like the floor is white as well as the bag being white. And then as it deflates, the lights get stronger and the sound, it changes from being the sound of flowing water to the sound of burning wood and the crackle and the snap of the wood. And the lights get much, much brighter. And then ultimately the contents of the bag are revealed. I see that look on your face.
Because I'm trying to picture this. You're inside the...
Well, you're not inside the bag.
Oh,
you're
not
inside the
bag.
gallery.
Okay.
You're inside the gallery, and it pretty much fills up the entire gallery. In the case of Kaslo, you'll be forced to one end of the gallery.
Oh, okay. You're outside the bag.
You're outside
Gotcha.
the bag,
Okay.
yeah.
And
No.
then as it
Yeah.
deflates, you
Yeah.
can see what's inside.
Yeah, I don't want to be responsible for people being inside the bag. Yeah.
I was going to say, how far does this deflate?
Yeah. For the contents of the bag, depending upon where I'm showing it, I'll go to those places. Like in the case of Kaslo, I'm actually soliciting the help of the students from J.V. Humphreys. But I'm also going to Sharon Nelson in Nelson, which is a thrift store we have, and collecting anything that I see that is about to go into the waste stream. So I'm mining the banks of the waste stream, if you will, for the contents of this. And ultimately, that's what becomes the contents. And so when the bag is completely deflated, it reveals it actually very clearly because the material of the ripstop nylon is almost translucent.
Right.
You can see color through it, and you can definitely see form through it because there's quite a suction happening.
How interesting to move from, like you said, that big sort of soft, smooth, inflated bag with the sound of the water running and the dimmed lights, and then this harsh reality.
Exactly. And I'm really kind of fascinated with that. In our own personal lives, we all have to deal with tragedy or loss or a situation that is difficult to cope with. And our way of coping with it is in a way to mask it or hide it. You know, I was explaining this to my goddaughter, who's about 7 years old, and I described it to her as a device for hiding everything we know but don't really want to think about.
Which is a kind of the state that we all live in these days, isn't it? Really?
Pretty much perpetually, yeah. To me, it struck a chord, that idea.
I think because so many of us, we have to put our heads firmly somewhere to just get through the day. Right?
Exactly.
Because if you start to think about all the realities around, it's pretty horrifying.
Yeah. And as an artist who likes to work with the idea of consumption and refuse, it's never very useful to beat people about the head with your ideas. It's just really trying to find another perspective on the same issue.
I find it so interesting, Ian, how the original work, the vacuum suctioning, the concept just grows and grows, and then there's something else that comes into play there, too, in your whole creativity.
Yeah, well, it's very much a journey in so many ways. The beginning with that vacuum forming technique, and then following through with experimenting with it, with actually approaching it in all seriousness as a way, perhaps, of forming clay. I think it can only happen if I do it, if I'm serious about actually doing it. To me, it's always a bit of a surprise where it ends up.
So you're going to tour.
It's a series of 3 installations. The first one is called The Inventor's Room, and it documents the invention. Essentially, you move through that room, and as you get toward the end of that room, you start to get into the physical experiments of the vacuum forming. And then you enter into what I call the antechamber. And the antechamber is a very long, thin room. It's about 25 feet long and 10 feet wide. So it's almost like a corridor, but it's completely lined with tiles that were formed using the vacuum forming process. In front of and behind you, there's a 10-foot by 10-foot piece that was made of, each of those is about 250 pieces made on the telephone. And then to your side, to your left, there's a piece that's made by vacuum forming light bulbs with another 350 tiles. And then on your right, it's a piece vacuum formed over tea kettles. As you move through that space, I mean, the idea is that it's a transition space from reality and your reality of the world outside to the place of the chamber, which you enter into at the end of the antechamber.
It's sort of like entering into your mind there for a little bit too, is it?
It is, yeah. And all of the pieces in the antechamber have a very thin, tight series of vertical lines, fairly high contrast. So there's a bit of a visual reverberation that goes on as well as a physical experience.
It's interesting as an observer, as a person in a gallery, to be able to physically go through spaces like that and inhabit them and experience them.
Yeah, I think it probably comes from being an architect that I actually want to encourage people to have those experiences, to actually
be in spaces.
Yeah.
So you've got the students involved. They're collecting.
I do. They're collecting.
They're mining, like would you say mining
They're
on
mining,
the edge?
They're mining the waste stream, the banks of the waste stream.
The banks of the waste stream, yes.
I've kind of gotten them a little bit more specific in Caslo. I'm asking them to collect recyclable plastic. I think it's valuable just to see a number of people collect a certain type of waste item over a period of time, just so that they can have an idea of the actual volumes. We have no way of understanding the vastness of the implications of a small choice, just to buy one thing as opposed to buying something else. And it can actually mean a mountain of garbage somewhere down the road.
Yeah, which I never see.
Yeah.
Yeah, my little soap bottle, it's
exactly.
gone. Yeah.
Exactly, or your water bottle or whatever it is.
Right. Now for you, is mounting this exhibition with the 3 parts, is this the end of this particular exploration?
Well, it goes on this tour across the country and ending in Hamilton, but usually the end of one body of work is kind of the beginning of the next. Right now, I'm in that sort of strange flux space where I'm trying to figure out what to do next. And I'm looking at that inflatable chamber and thinking that that is definitely a source, and it's certainly interesting to me. And I'm going to become very intimate over the next 2 years with filling it up and experiencing it. It's very possible that that could be the source of the next body of work.
Where did you find such a giant bag?
Well, when I was fantasizing about it, I was thinking about that. You know how they wrap up yachts and buildings in white plastic and bales of hay. Mm-hmm. That was what I was thinking about. But it's one thing to dream about white plastic, and it's another thing to suck the air out of it and join it all together. What I ended up deciding to do was to work with ripstop nylon.
So you had to get that great big bag made.
I made the bag.
You made it?
Yeah. I learned how to sew in the 1980s. So.
Who knew that architecture could involve such things?
Yeah.
So the sewing came in handy again.
So the sewing came in very handy. I mean, I don't think I could make a pair of pants or anything like that, but making a big bag is not very complicated.
Just keeping it all straight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, if you're dealing with something that's 30 feet long, if you're a little bit out in the seams, I don't think anyone's going to notice.
Ian, thanks so much. It's great to get a chance to talk to you again. That's artist Ian Johnson. The Chamber, Reinventing Consumption, is at the Langham Cultural Centre in Caslo until March the 24th, and then it's going to travel across Canada.